She remained silent the entire time, but in the courtroom she said just one sentence and showed a video that no one expected to see. Subscribe so you don't miss any new stories, and write in the comments which city you're from. The morning light slipped through the thin lemon-printed curtains, falling in soft, uneven stripes across the small kitchen where Layla moved with tired precision. Her bare feet patted across the cool, cracked linoleum as she stirred oatmeal in a pot, the cheap wooden spoon tapping against the dented metal. A kettle whistled, letting out a high, persistent cry that seemed too loud for the quiet of their little apartment. She turned it off quickly, glancing toward the doorway where she knew Naomi would appear any moment, clutching her worn-out backpack and blinking sleep from her eyes. On the cluttered kitchen table lay a stack of bills, some with red stamps across the top that made Layla's stomach tighten each time she looked at them. A small notebook with fading lines sat open beside them, filled with her careful, cramped handwriting. Calculations, schedules, grocery lists trimmed down to essentials, notes on upcoming nursing exams she studied for during her short breaks. She pressed her hand over the numbers, took a breath, and forced herself to smile as she heard the shuffle of small feet behind her. Naomi stood there in the doorway, her hair braided into neat, slightly uneven cornrows, wearing a blue shirt missing a button near the collar that Layla had sewn back on in the early hours of the morning. She clutched a thin book with colorful stickers peeling at the edges, her dark brown eyes looking too serious for her age, searching her mother's face for reassurance. Layla's smile widened, despite the heaviness in her chest, and she beckoned Naomi closer. Breakfast was quiet except for the soft clink of spoons and the muffled hum of a neighbor's television through the thin apartment walls. Naomi ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, while Layla pretended to read a medical textbook propped open beside her, eyes glancing back and forth between the page and her daughter. Naomi looked up suddenly, a bit of oatmeal on her lip, and grinned, showing the gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. Layla reached over, wiping her lip gently, the touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary, grounding herself in this small moment of normalcy. They had their rituals, small threads of stability Layla wove into Naomi's life with care. At night, no matter how exhausted Layla was from her 12-hour shifts at the hospice, she would read to Naomi, letting the gentle rhythm of words fill the room as Naomi's eyelids fluttered, fighting sleep. On Sundays, they made waffles on a scratched nonstick pan, the batter dripping onto the stove, and Naomi would laugh as Layla tried to flip them without tearing them apart. Sometimes they would sit on the small balcony with a second-hand telescope Layla had bought from a thrift shop, Naomi's soft voice asking endless questions about the stars, the moon, the worlds they could barely see. Layla would answer them all, even when her eyes burned with exhaustion, even when the weight of unpaid bills and missed hours of sleep pressed into her shoulders like bricks. Naomi was her world, the single bright point in the long, weary nights filled with fluorescent lights, beeping machines, and the quiet sobs of patients who had no one else to hold their hands. Sometimes, in the stillness between dawn and waking, Layla would allow herself to remember Marcus, Naomi's father, the man who had once held her hand under the streetlights, promising her the world with a smile that hid the easy lies he told himself. She remembered the night he left, Naomi, only 3, her small arms wrapped around Layla's neck as they both stood by the window, waiting for headlights that never came. The taste of tears mixed with the warm weight of Naomi sleeping against her was something Layla never forgot, something that hardened into quiet determination as she took extra shifts, learned to budget every penny, and built a life with what little she had. She had not heard from Marcus in years, not really. An occasional birthday card for Naomi with a scribbled signature, a rare child support payment that arrived too late to matter, were the only reminders that he existed. Until the phone call that came on a damp Tuesday morning as Layla sat reviewing her notes for an upcoming certification test, Naomi still asleep in the bedroom. The voice on the other end was familiar but carried a new confidence, a crispness that made Layla grip the phone tighter. Marcus wanted to be part of Naomi's life, he said, his words practiced, casual, as if he had not missed 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees. Layla's hand shook, the pen she held dropping to the table as her mind spun through the implications, the threat hidden beneath the polite tone. She forced herself to respond calmly, promising nothing, her eyes moving to the bedroom door, imagining Naomi's small body curled under the blanket, unaware of the storm rolling toward them. Naomi overheard fragments of the conversation, peeking around the corner with curiosity, asking later, "Who was that, Mama?" Layla sat her down, explaining in careful words that her father wanted to see her, watching Naomi's face for any sign of fear, confusion, or excitement. Naomi just blinked, processing the information with the quiet seriousness that always seemed too heavy for her small shoulders. The day Marcus came to see Naomi was bright and cold, the sky a flat gray that pressed down on the neighborhood. He arrived in a sleek car that shone like polished obsidian, stepping out in a suit that probably cost more than Layla made in a month. His smile was easy, the same one he had used when convincing Layla to let him handle the rent, the bills, the promises that dissolved like smoke when the pressure became too real. Beside him stood his new wife, a tall, pale woman in a cream coat, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses, her lips painted a precise red that did not shift even when she forced a polite smile. Naomi hid behind Layla's leg, peeking out at the man who was her father in name, but not in memory. Marcus crouched down, opening his arms, calling her princess as if he had the right to that word, holding out a wrapped box that sparkled in the cold light. Naomi took it hesitantly, clutching it to her chest, her eyes darting back to Layla, seeking permission, safety. They drove away in the black car, Naomi pressed against the window, her small hand lifting in a wavering wave, her eyes wide and uncertain. Layla stood on the sidewalk long after the car had disappeared, her breath visible in the cold air, the silence around her louder than any scream. Marcus's home was nothing like their small apartment. It was a sprawling house in a neighborhood where the sidewalks were clean and the lawns were trimmed by quiet landscapers who arrived before sunrise. Naomi was given a room with a princess bed and shelves lined with the dolls that still had tags on their arms. The air smelled like expensive candles, and every surface was clean, untouched, lifeless. Dinner was served at a long table where Naomi was told to sit up straight, to use the right fork, to not speak unless spoken to. The woman, her stepmother, corrected her posture with a cold hand on her back, smiling a smile that did not reach her eyes, telling Naomi she would learn how to behave properly. The walls of the house seemed to listen to every sound Naomi made, and she learned quickly to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible. When Naomi returned home, she did not run into Layla's arms. She stepped out of the car slowly, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Marcus had given her, her eyes wide, her mouth set in a tight line. Layla knelt down, opening her arms, and Naomi finally moved, pressing her small body against her mother, shaking with silent tears that she did not let fall. Layla felt the shift immediately, the way Naomi's eyes scanned their small apartment as if she were seeing it for the first time, comparing it to the cold luxury of Marcus's house. Layla forced a smile, ruffling Naomi's hair, trying to bring her back to the warmth of their home, the smell of oatmeal and lavender, the sound of laughter that echoed in their small space. That night, after Naomi had fallen asleep clutching her old stuffed rabbit, Layla sat at the kitchen table with her cup of cheap tea, staring at the numbers in her notebook without seeing them. The phone call had been the first crack, and now the fracture was spreading, a quiet dread settling in her chest as she thought about the future, about custody papers, about the money Marcus had, the lawyers he could afford. She looked toward the small bedroom where Naomi slept, the faint glow of the nightlight spilling into the hallway, and she made a promise to herself, a silent vow that no matter what came, no matter how hard it would be, she would protect Naomi. She would fight, even if it meant standing alone against the storm that was gathering, because Naomi was her world, and she would not let that world be taken from her without a battle. The pattern settled quickly, slipping into their lives with the cold persistence of winter frost creeping across a window pane. Every Friday afternoon, Marcus's car would appear at the curb, black and gleaming, the engine purring low as it waited. Naomi would stand by the door, clutching her small backpack, her shoulders hunched forward, her eyes scanning the street as if hoping for something to delay the inevitable. Layla would kneel, checking the straps on the backpack, smoothing the edges of Naomi's braids, breathing in the scent of her daughter's shampoo, as if trying to memorize it before she had to let her go again. Each week, Naomi would glance at Layla, her lips parting as if to speak, but the words never came. Instead, she would clutch her worn-out stuffed rabbit, pressing it to her chest before slipping it carefully into her backpack, hiding it between a pair of folded pajamas and her favorite book with the frayed cover. Layla would watch her daughter walk toward the waiting car, the driver's door opening, Marcus stepping out with that same practiced smile, the same easy charm that had once made Layla believe he could be a father worth having. Marcus's hand would rest on Naomi's shoulder, guiding her into the back seat, while his wife, always impeccably dressed, would give Layla a tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. The door would close with a soft, final click, and the car would drive away, leaving Layla standing on the sidewalk with her arms wrapped around herself, the cold wind tugging at the edges of her sweater as she tried to push back the rising dread in her chest. The changes in Naomi were slow at first, small shifts that Layla tried to ignore, tried to explain away as the confusion of a child adjusting to something new. Naomi would come home on Sunday evenings quieter than before, her laughter softer, her smiles hesitant, as if she were testing the air to see if it was safe before letting herself be a child again. She began to eat less, pushing food around on her plate, her eyes distant, her mind somewhere else. She started biting her nails, the small crescents of her nails growing ragged and red, sometimes bleeding when she bit too hard, leaving stains on her homework and small spots on her pillowcases. At night, Layla would hear her daughter whimpering in her sleep, calling out softly for her, her voice cracking with fear that Layla could not reach, trapped in nightmares that Naomi never fully explained when she woke. The calls from Naomi's school began after the third visit to Marcus's house. Mrs. Carter, her first-grade teacher, asked Layla to come in for a meeting. Layla sat in the small chair across from the teacher's desk, clutching her purse in her lap as Mrs. Carter showed her Naomi's artwork. The drawings that had once been filled with bright yellows and blues, smiling suns and fields of flowers were now scribbled in dark, heavy lines, jagged shapes pressed hard into the paper. "She seems withdrawn lately," Mrs. Carter said gently, her eyes kind but filled with concern. She sits alone during recess, and when I ask her if she wants to join the other children, she just shakes her head. Has anything changed at home recently? Layla felt the words catch in her throat. She explained, carefully, that Naomi's father had come back into her life, that she was spending weekends with him now. Mrs. Carter nodded, her expression softening, but the concern did not leave her eyes. She asked me last week if children have to live with their daddies, even if they don't want to, Mrs. Carter said. I told her that children should live where they feel safe and loved. The conversation echoed in Layla's mind as she walked home, her hands shaking as she tried to fit the key into the lock of their apartment. Naomi was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring in a book, her small hands moving the crayon slowly across the page, her eyes flickering up as her mother entered. Layla walked over, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, but Naomi flinched just barely before leaning into the touch. The weekends with Marcus continued, each one carving deeper lines of fear into Naomi's small frame. She began hiding her favorite toys before leaving on Fridays, tucking them into drawers, pushing them under her bed, whispering to them that she would come back for them soon. Layla found Mr. Bunny, Naomi's stuffed rabbit, hidden in the laundry hamper one Friday afternoon, and when she asked Naomi why he was there, Naomi looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. So he's safe until I come back. Layla's heart cracked a little more at those words, but she pulled Naomi into a hug, telling her that Mr. Bunny would be waiting, that their home would always be here for her, no matter what. Sunday evenings became moments Layla both longed for and dreaded. She would wait by the window, watching the street until Marcus's car appeared, pulling into the curb with the same mechanical grace. Naomi would step out slowly, clutching her small bag, her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoiding Marcus's gaze as he tried to pat her head, his smile slipping when Naomi flinched away. His wife, standing beside him, would force a smile as she handed Naomi over, her words tight and sharp. She was very difficult this weekend, she would say, loud enough for Naomi to hear. She wouldn't eat her dinner, threw a tantrum at bedtime. Perhaps she needs more discipline at home. Naomi would remain silent until they were halfway home, the silence in the car pressing down on them both like a weight neither of them could lift. One evening, as they passed under the flickering streetlights, Naomi finally spoke, her voice trembling. Miss Diane says little girls should be quiet unless they're spoken to. Layla tightened her grip on the steering wheel, forcing her voice to remain calm as she promised Naomi that she was allowed to speak, that her voice mattered, but Naomi just looked out the window, her reflection in the glass looking so small, so alone. The signs of distress grew harder to ignore. Naomi began wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 4. She would wake in the middle of the night, her sheets damp, tears running down her cheeks as she tried to apologize, her small hands clutching at Layla's arms as if afraid she would be angry. Layla would only hold her, rocking her gently, whispering that it was okay, that she was safe, that she was home. Layla's exhaustion deepened, the bags under her eyes darkening as she juggled her night shifts, her nursing studies, and the growing fear that Marcus was trying to take Naomi away for good. The memory of his confident voice on the phone haunted her, the way he spoke about what's best for Naomi, with the ease of a man who believed money could buy anything, even a child's love. The final crack came one Sunday evening when Naomi returned home with a small bruise on her wrist. Layla knelt down, taking Naomi's hand gently, examining the purplish mark, her mind spinning with questions she was afraid to ask. "What happened to your arm, sweetie?" Layla asked softly. Naomi pulled her sleeve down quickly, her eyes darting away. "I fell," she mumbled, her voice flat, empty, unconvincing. That night, as Layla brushed Naomi's hair after her bath, the silence between them felt like a wall. Normally, this was their time to giggle, to tell silly stories, to plan the dreams Naomi would have when she fell asleep. But Naomi was quiet, her eyes fixed on her reflection in the mirror, her small hands clutching the edge of the sink. "Naomi," Layla said gently, meeting her daughter's eyes in the mirror, "you know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all." Naomi nodded slowly, but her lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, pressing her lips together tightly. That night, after Naomi had fallen asleep, Layla sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the small, cheap clock ticking on the wall, the sound loud in the silence of the apartment. She thought of Marcus, of his house, his wife, the cold smiles and the heavy silences that clung to Naomi like a shadow each time she returned. She thought of the bruise on her daughter's wrist, the fear in her eyes, the way she hid her toys before leaving. Layla realized then that Marcus wasn't just visiting Naomi. He was weaving a web around her, around them both, pulling tighter with each weekend, each whispered threat, each promise of a better life. And Layla knew that if she didn't find a way to protect Naomi, that web would close around them completely. She stood up, moving quietly to Naomi's bedroom, watching her daughter sleep, her small body curled around Mr. Bunny, the rise and fall of her breathing a fragile reminder of the innocence Layla was fighting to preserve. She brushed a hand over Naomi's forehead, whispering a promise into the darkness. "I will protect you," she vowed, her voice steady even as tears slid down her cheeks. "No matter what it takes, I will protect you." And as the city outside moved on in its restless, indifferent rhythm, Layla prepared herself for the fight she knew was coming, the fight she could not afford to lose. Because Naomi was her world, and she would not let that world be taken, no matter how powerful Marcus believed he was, no matter how coldly the world tried to silence a child's voice. Not this time. Naomi woke before dawn, the sky outside still the soft, heavy gray of a world not yet awake. She lay in bed, clutching Mr. Bunny against her chest, feeling the soft, familiar comfort of his worn fur beneath her small hands. Her eyes flickered to the door, to the thin strip of light from the kitchen where Mama was quietly moving, trying not to wake her before heading out for her night shift. Naomi listened to the gentle clatter of cups, the soft creak of the floor, the hushed sighs Mama let out when she thought no one could hear. She pressed Mr. Bunny closer, closing her eyes for a moment, wishing she could stay in that moment forever, wrapped in the quiet safety of home. But she knew that Friday was coming again, and with it the black car, the cold house, and the heavy silences that pressed down on her until she felt she could barely breathe. It was during one of those silent, breath-held mornings that Naomi decided she had to do something, even if she didn't know exactly what. She remembered the way Miss Diane's lips pressed into a thin, angry line when Naomi asked if she could call Mama, the way Marcus's voice grew sharp, almost a hiss, when he told her she needed to be quiet, that she needed to learn how to behave if she wanted to live in a nice house. She remembered the cold emptiness in the big room, the dolls on the shelves that never moved, never laughed, never comforted her when she cried into her pillow at night. Naomi reached under her pillow, pulling out the old phone Mama had given her to play games and listen to music. The screen was scratched, the case was cracked at the corner, but it still worked, and Naomi had learned how to use it well enough to take pictures of Mr. Bunny, of the stars from their balcony, of Mama when she wasn't looking, smiling softly as she stirred oatmeal in the morning. Now, Naomi learned how to use it for something else. At Marcus's house, she hid the phone under her pillow, under her blanket, sometimes inside her sock, careful to keep it hidden when Miss Diane came into her room to check if she was asleep. She would pretend to be asleep, her breathing slow and even, her eyes closed, while the adult spoke in the hallway outside her door, voices rising and falling in sharp, cold waves that made Naomi's stomach twist with fear. It was during one of these nights that Naomi pressed the record button for the first time, her small fingers trembling as she tucked the phone beside her under the blanket. She held Mr. Bunny tight, the phone hidden in the folds of her pajamas, the red light blinking softly, unseen, as she listened. Marcus's voice was harsh, cutting through the darkness like a blade. "She needs to tell the judge that her mother leaves her alone," he said, his words biting. "She needs to say she's scared when Layla goes to work at night. That's how we'll get custody." Miss Diane's voice followed, smooth but cold, like the silk curtains that hung in Naomi's room. "She's only 7, Marcus. She'll say what we tell her to say, but you need to stop scaring her so much. She came down crying last night." There was a pause, the sound of footsteps pacing, the soft clink of a glass being set down too hard on a table. "I don't care," Marcus snapped. "I'm not losing this case. I'm not letting Layla keep her in that dump forever. Once we get custody, we'll move to San Francisco, and this will all be behind us." "And Naomi?" Miss Diane asked, her voice calm, as if they were discussing what to have for dinner. "There are excellent boarding schools in Switzerland," Marcus said. "Problem solved." Naomi's eyes squeezed shut, tears slipping down her cheeks as she tried to keep her breathing even, tried not to let the sobs escape her throat. She held Mr. Bunny tighter, wishing she could disappear, wishing she could run home to Mama, to the small apartment, to the warm smell of lavender and the soft sound of Mama's laughter when they made waffles on Sunday mornings. In the dark, Naomi made a promise to herself. She would find a way to tell the truth, even if it scared her, even if it made Marcus angry. She would find a way to make someone listen. The next morning, Naomi hid the phone deep in her bag, checking again and again to make sure it was still there, the recordings safe inside. On the drive back home, she sat in the back seat, clutching Mr. Bunny, her eyes fixed on the road, ignoring Marcus's attempts to talk to her, ignoring the forced smiles Miss Diane threw over her shoulder. When they pulled up outside the small apartment building, Naomi felt her heart jump, her fingers clutching the straps of her backpack so tightly that they hurt. She saw Mama waiting by the door, her tired face lighting up when she saw Naomi step out of the car. Marcus bent down, trying to hug Naomi, but she stepped back, pressing herself against Mama's side, feeling the warm, familiar weight of her mother's arm wrapping around her shoulders. "She's been difficult," Miss Diane said, her voice sharp, her smile tight. "You should consider stricter discipline." Layla didn't respond, her hand tightening on Naomi's shoulder as she nodded, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, the phone hidden under her pillow, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Mama could hear it in the other room. She thought about the recordings, about Marcus's voice, about the way Miss Diane had laughed when Naomi cried, telling her that big girls don't cry. She thought about the fear that curled in her stomach every time Friday came, every time the black car pulled up, every time she had to leave home. Naomi slipped out of bed, padding softly across the floor, Mr. Bunny tucked under one arm, the phone clutched in her small hand. She found Mama in the kitchen, sitting at the table. The soft light of the lamp casting tired shadows across her face as she read her nursing textbook, highlighter in hand. "Mama?" Naomi whispered, her voice trembling. Layla looked up quickly, concern flooding her eyes as she set down the highlighter. "Baby, what's wrong?" Naomi hesitated, then held out the phone, her hand shaking. "I did something bad," she whispered. "I recorded them." Layla's eyes widened as she took the phone, her fingers brushing against Naomi's, feeling how cold they were. "What do you mean, baby?" Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I recorded what they say, Daddy and Miss Diane. I thought maybe someone would listen if I had proof." Layla pulled Naomi into her lap, wrapping her arms around her daughter, feeling the small body tremble against her chest. She pressed her lips against Naomi's hair, breathing in the warm, familiar scent, tears slipping down her cheeks as she realized the weight her child had been carrying alone. "Oh, baby," Layla whispered, rocking her gently. "You did nothing wrong. You were so brave." Naomi clutched Mr. Bunny tighter, burying her face against Mama's shoulder. "Will you listen, Mama? Will you listen to what they say?" Layla nodded, holding Naomi closer, promising silently that she would listen, that she would fight, that she would protect her daughter no matter what it took. That night, after Naomi had fallen asleep in her arms, Layla listened to the recordings, the phone pressed to her ear, her hand covering her mouth as she heard Marcus's threats, Miss Diane's cold dismissals, the casual cruelty in their voices. Her heart pounded with anger, with fear, with a fierce determination that burned brighter with each word she heard. She knew what she had to do. She would not let Marcus win. She would not let him take Naomi away, to silence her, to break the small, bright spirit that made Naomi who she was. She would fight with everything she had for her daughter's right to be heard, to be safe, to be loved. The next morning, Layla called in sick to her shift, her voice steady as she spoke to her supervisor, her hands trembling only slightly as she ended the call. She picked up the phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number her sister Monica had given her months ago. A lawyer, Monica had said, someone who fights for mothers like us. Layla took a deep breath and pressed the call button, holding the phone to her ear as it rang. She would fight. For Naomi, for their home, for the promise she had made in the quiet of the night. And this time, she would not be alone. Layla stood in the small, overheated waiting room of the legal aid office, clutching the phone in her hand, Naomi's recordings saved in a folder she had renamed Truth. The air smelled faintly of coffee and floor cleaner, and the seats were filled with tired mothers, fathers with wrinkled papers clutched in their hands, grandparents staring down at folded photos of children they were trying to protect. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead matched the buzzing in Layla's ears as she tried to steady her breathing. She had spent the night before listening to the recordings again, each word from Marcus scraping against her like a blade, the cold dismissal in Diane's voice twisting in her gut. Naomi had fallen asleep in her arms, her small body finally relaxing for the first time in weeks, and Layla had sat there, holding her, pressing her lips to her daughter's hair as the dawn light crept across the wall, promising herself that this would not be their life forever. When her name was called, she stood on legs that felt unsteady, gripping the handle of her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The lawyer's office was small but neat, with a potted plant in the corner and a stack of carefully organized folders on the desk. Behind the desk sat Aisha, a young lawyer with tightly curled hair pulled back into a bun, glasses perched on her nose, and eyes that flickered with intelligence and something else Layla recognized immediately: determination. "Layla, thank you for coming in," Aisha said, standing to shake her hand, her grip firm. "Your sister told me a little about what's been happening, but I'd like to hear it from you directly." Layla sat, taking a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her purse and pulled out the phone, placing it on the table between them like a fragile offering. She told Aisha everything, her voice low but steady, about Marcus's sudden reappearance, the weekends that left Naomi withdrawn and frightened, the bruise on her wrist, the nightmares, the recordings. As she spoke, Aisha nodded, taking notes with quick, precise movements, her eyes never leaving Layla's face. When Layla finished, there was a long moment of silence, the only sound the ticking of the small clock on the wall. Aisha reached forward, gently picking up the phone, her fingers moving swiftly as she opened the recordings, slipping in an earbud to listen. Layla watched her face, searching for any sign of doubt, any hint that she might be told this was not enough, that Marcus would still win because he had money, connections, power. But as Aisha listened, her eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. She removed the earbud, setting the phone down carefully, her hands folding on the desk. "These recordings are powerful, Layla," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "They show clear attempts at emotional manipulation and coercion. In many states, including ours, recordings made by a child in their own environment to document abuse or coercion can be admissible in court." Layla let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her shoulders slumping slightly as a wave of relief washed over her. "But," Aisha continued, leaning forward, "we need to approach this carefully. Marcus's lawyers will argue that Naomi was manipulated into making these recordings, that you coached her. We have to be ready for that. And Layla, it is possible that Naomi may need to speak to the judge about these recordings." Layla felt her stomach twist, the fear rising in her throat. "She's only 7, she whispered. "I know," Aisha said gently. "And that's exactly why this evidence is so important. No 7-year-old should have to do what Naomi did to be heard. But the fact that she felt she had to speaks volumes, Layla. It shows she was scared, that she didn't feel safe, and that she wanted someone to listen." Layla closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Naomi's small face, the way she had looked up with trembling hope when she handed her the phone, the way she had clung to her that night, whispering that she just wanted to come home and stay home. "What do we need to do?" Layla asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "We prepare," Aisha said firmly. "We will file a motion to submit the recordings as evidence, and we will prepare Naomi, gently, for the possibility that she may need to answer some questions. We will emphasize her words, her fear, her voice. We will show the court that you have provided a stable, loving home, even with your night shifts, even with your limited income. We will show them that Naomi's emotional well-being should not be sacrificed for the illusion of a better life." The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet moments where Layla tried to prepare Naomi without frightening her further. They sat at the kitchen table one evening, the warm scent of cocoa filling the air, marshmallows slowly melting in their cups, as Layla explained, as gently as she could, what might happen. "The videos you took, sweetheart," Layla said, her fingers brushing Naomi's curls back from her forehead. "They might help us in court. It means the judge might ask you some questions about them, about why you made them." Naomi stirred her cocoa, her small brow furrowed, her lips pressing together in thought. "Will Daddy be there?" she asked softly. "Yes," Layla said, swallowing past a lump in her throat. "But he can't hurt you, Naomi. I will be there, and Aisha will be there, and the judge is there to listen to you." Naomi looked up, her dark eyes so serious, so much older than 7. "I'm not scared of the questions," she said after a moment. "I'm scared of going back to Daddy's house." Layla pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her close. "That's why we're doing this, baby, so you don't have to be scared anymore." The night before the hearing, Layla tucked Naomi into bed, reading her 2 stories instead of 1, lingering over the words, letting Naomi's laughter at the silly parts ease the tightness in her chest. As she smoothed the blanket over her daughter, Naomi reached out, taking her hand. "Remember, Mama," Naomi said softly, "you said I did the right thing." Layla nodded, tears burning in her eyes. "You did, baby. You were so brave." Naomi hugged Mr. Bunny tight against her chest, her small face solemn in the soft glow of the nightlight. "Miss Diane says little girls should be quiet," she whispered. "But sometimes, if you're too quiet, nobody hears you when you need help." Layla's breath caught, a sob rising in her chest that she quickly swallowed down as she bent to kiss Naomi's forehead. "You're right, Naomi," she whispered. "You are so right." That night, as Layla lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside, the distant sound of sirens, the soft murmur of neighbors through the thin walls. She thought of Marcus, of his arrogance, of the way he dismissed Naomi's fear as childish disobedience, of the way Diane's sharp voice had spoken about Naomi like she was a problem to be solved. She thought of Naomi's voice, small but clear, whispering that she didn't want to go back. And she knew with absolute certainty that they would fight, and they would not be silent. When dawn broke, Layla rose quietly, making Naomi's favorite breakfast, pancakes shaped like stars and hearts, drizzling them with a little syrup they had saved for special days. Naomi ate slowly, her eyes bright with nervousness, but she smiled when Layla squeezed her hand. They dressed carefully. Naomi in her favorite blue dress with the silver stars, the one she said made her feel brave, and Layla in her neatest clothes, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes steady as she looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not the tiredness but the determination. At the courthouse, Aisha met them in the lobby, kneeling to Naomi's level, smiling gently. "Remember what we talked about, Naomi," she said. "Just tell the truth, nothing more, nothing less. The truth is the strongest thing in the world." Naomi nodded, holding tightly to Mr. Bunny in one hand, Mama's hand in the other, her small shoulders squaring as she took a breath. The doors to the courtroom opened, and together they stepped inside, ready to be heard. The courtroom felt colder than Layla expected, the air-conditioned chill crawling under the collar of her neatly pressed blouse as she held Naomi's hand, walking slowly toward the front. The wooden benches were already half-filled, a soft murmur of voices and the occasional rustle of paper, the only sounds before the bailiff called the room to order. The judge's bench loomed, solid and heavy, Judge Rivera's presence both calm and intimidating as he sorted papers with measured precision, his glasses catching the glare of the overhead lights. Naomi stood close to Layla, her blue dress with the silver stars swaying slightly as she shifted from foot to foot, clutching Mr. Bunny in one hand, the fabric worn and comforting. Layla squeezed her daughter's hand gently, leaning down to whisper, "You are so brave, Naomi. Remember, just tell the truth." Marcus sat across the aisle, his suit impeccable, his posture relaxed as if he were attending a business meeting instead of a custody hearing. Beside him, Diane wore a sharp, fitted dress, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes flicking over Layla and Naomi with a cold, detached calculation. Their lawyer, Miss Winters, sorted a thick stack of documents with an efficient flick of her wrist, the polished edge of her nails glinting as she whispered something to Marcus that made him smirk, his eyes briefly locking onto Naomi before shifting away. As proceedings began, Miss Winters rose, her voice firm and controlled as she outlined Marcus's stable lifestyle, emphasizing the financial security he could provide, the large home, the potential for Naomi to attend a private school, the opportunities that would best serve the child's development. Layla sat rigidly, forcing herself to keep her breathing steady as Miss Winters described Naomi's current life in terms that stung like tiny needles. Modest, unstable work hours, inconsistent routine. Aisha's turn came next, and she stood with quiet authority, her notes held loosely in one hand, her eyes steady on Judge Rivera. She spoke not of material stability, but of emotional safety, of the consistent, nurturing environment Layla provided, the bedtime stories, the Sunday morning pancakes, the way Naomi had a place where she felt safe enough to laugh and dream. She did not shy away from Layla's night shifts, but explained how those were chosen so Layla could be there for Naomi when she returned from school. How, despite working nights, Layla ensured Naomi never felt alone. Judge Rivera listened without interruption, his pen tapping against the desk occasionally, his eyes narrowing only slightly as he scribbled a note or two on the yellow pad before him. When Aisha finished, the judge removed his glasses, folding them neatly before resting his hands on the desk. "Miss Roberts," he began, looking directly at Layla, "while I appreciate your efforts as a single mother, I must consider what environment would best serve Naomi's development. Why would a child wish to remain in an environment where her opportunities are limited when her father can provide so many more resources?" The question hovered in the air, heavy and cold, Marcus's smirk returning as Miss Winters nodded, clearly seeing this as confirmation of their case. Layla's mouth opened, words trembling on her tongue, but before she could speak, she felt Naomi's small hand slip from hers. Naomi stepped forward, her blue dress shimmering slightly as it caught the light. Mr. Bunny clutched to her chest, her small shoulders squared as she looked up at Judge Rivera. The room fell silent, the rustling of papers stopping, even Marcus's smirk freezing as he turned to look at his daughter. "Excuse me," Naomi said, her voice clear, the soft innocence cutting through the tension like a beam of light. "I brought the video of what he does at night." For a moment, the courtroom was utterly still, the silence ringing in Layla's ears as she watched her daughter, standing so small yet so strong in the center of the room. Judge Rivera blinked, clearly surprised, leaning forward. "Young lady, this isn't," he began, but Aisha stood quickly, her voice respectful but firm. "Your Honor, Naomi has evidence she recorded herself, evidence that is highly relevant to these proceedings. We have submitted it as Exhibit D." Miss Winters immediately rose, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, the court has not reviewed any such recordings, and we filed a motion to exclude without viewing the content," Aisha interjected calmly, citing privacy concerns that do not apply in this case. "We are asking the court to consider Naomi's own documentation of her experiences." Judge Rivera's brow furrowed as he looked down at the folder marked Exhibit D, then back at Naomi, whose eyes, so much older than her years, held his gaze without wavering. Marcus shifted in his seat, leaning forward, his voice a hiss that carried across the silent room. "What video?" he snapped, his face flushing red. "Naomi, what did you do?" Naomi did not flinch. She hugged Mr. Bunny tighter, taking a small step back toward her mother without breaking her gaze with the judge. Judge Rivera cleared his throat, looking toward the bailiff. "The court will view the submitted recordings in chambers. We will take a 30-minute recess." Layla let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, sinking into the bench as Naomi turned, pressing herself against her mother's side, her small body trembling. Aisha leaned in, her hand on Layla's shoulder. "You both did exactly what you needed to do." They waited in a small, quiet conference room, Naomi sitting at the table with a coloring book Aisha had brought, her crayons moving slowly, deliberately, as she filled in the petals of a flower with pink and purple. Layla watched her, memorizing the curve of her daughter's brow, the set of her mouth, the slight furrow that appeared whenever Naomi was deep in thought. When the bailiff returned, his expression unreadable, Layla's heart jumped into her throat. They followed him back into the courtroom, where the air felt different now, thicker, charged with something Layla could not name. Judge Rivera's face was no longer neutral. There was a hardness there, a quiet anger that had not been present before. Having reviewed the evidence submitted, Judge Rivera began, his voice controlled but steely, "This court finds the behavior exhibited by Mr. Sullivan toward his daughter deeply concerning. The recordings show clear attempts to manipulate a minor into providing false testimony and discuss plans that prioritize using the child as leverage rather than considering her emotional well-being." Marcus's face turned a deep, blotchy red, his mouth opening to speak, but the judge held up a hand sharply. "Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you remain silent. The authenticity of these recordings is not in question. The child's unscripted responses make it clear she was not coached." He turned to Naomi, his voice softening. "Naomi, did anyone tell you to make these recordings?" Naomi shook her head, her small hand gripping Mr. Bunny so tightly her knuckles whitened. "No, sir," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "I just wanted someone to believe me." Judge Rivera nodded slowly, turning back to his papers. "This court awards full physical and legal custody to Miss Layla Roberts. Mr. Sullivan will have supervised visitation only, pending completion of parenting classes and anger management therapy." The gasp that came from Diane was sharp, her eyes flashing with anger as she turned to Marcus, who shot to his feet, his voice loud and desperate. "This is ridiculous. Those recordings are illegal. She's a child, she doesn't know what she's doing. Naomi, tell them you were lying." The bailiff moved toward Marcus as his voice rose, but Naomi did not cower. She turned to look at her father, her small face calm, her eyes meeting his for the first time in weeks. "I didn't lie, Daddy," she said simply. "The tablet you gave me takes really good videos." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was not heavy with fear or uncertainty, but light, clear, final. As they left the courtroom, Naomi slipped her hand into Layla's, looking up with a small, tired but real smile. The rain was falling outside, soft and steady, washing the air clean as they stepped out under the gray sky. Naomi looked up at her mother, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion that lined both of their faces. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" she asked, her voice soft. Layla let out a laugh that was half a sob, pulling her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We can have pancakes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you want, baby." Naomi giggled, a small, bright sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. and together they walked home, the rain falling around them, the air smelling of wet earth and something new, something like freedom. Because Naomi had been heard, and no one could silence her again. The air in their small apartment felt different now. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted, the tension that had gripped each breath dissolving quietly, leaving space for laughter to echo again against the old, paint-chipped walls. Layla found herself standing at the kitchen counter one morning, turning to see Naomi laughing as she tried to flip a pancake with a spatula too big for her small hand. The pancake, folding in on itself, splattering a dot of batter onto her blue dress with the silver stars. Naomi burst into giggles, her laughter ringing out so clear that Layla had to pause, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the sound soak into her bones. They were building new routines, new rhythms, unburdened by the fear of Friday afternoons and the black car waiting at the curb. Naomi woke in the mornings without the shadow of dread in her eyes, sitting at the small table to eat oatmeal while reading her favorite book, humming softly to herself. She started wearing her hair in loose puffs some days, insisting she liked how bouncy it was, and she asked Layla if they could buy colorful hair clips the next time they went to the store. At night, Naomi no longer woke screaming, clutching at the sheets searching for Layla with wide, tear-filled eyes. She slept deeply, her breathing soft and even, Mr. Bunny held in one arm, his ears now ragged from the months of fear they had survived together. The wet sheets were a memory now, the whispers of apology replaced with peaceful mornings where Naomi stretched with a sleepy smile, asking what the day would bring. Layla felt herself returning to her own body, her own life, the exhaustion that had lived in her shoulders easing, allowing her to stand taller, to breathe without the constant fear that any knock on the door might be Marcus, demanding another piece of their safety. She started studying for her nurse practitioner exams again, her textbooks open late at night while Naomi colored at the table beside her, their quiet companionship grounding Layla, reminding her of the reasons she fought. Marcus tried to attend the first supervised visit, sitting in the brightly lit room of the community center, his eyes tired, his posture stiff, as Naomi refused to meet his gaze, her small hands clutching Mr. Bunny while she colored quietly, ignoring his attempts at conversation. After the third visit, where Naomi said nothing at all, Marcus stopped coming. They heard, through a friend of a friend, that he and Diane had moved to San Francisco, following the plans they had once made, minus the child they had tried to use as a pawn in their ambitions. Naomi asked about him once, on a Sunday evening as they made waffles for dinner, the sweet smell of vanilla and syrup filling the warm air. "Do you think Daddy will ever come back?" she asked, her voice small but not fearful, just curious. Layla paused, setting the whisk down, turned to look at Naomi's solemn face. "I don't know, baby," she answered honestly, moving to kneel beside her daughter, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "But I do know that you are safe now, and that your voice will always matter here." Naomi nodded slowly, as if turning the thought over in her mind, before smiling and returning to her task of arranging blueberries into a heart shape on her waffle. Elena, their neighbor, helped them celebrate the day the protective order was finalized, gathering a few neighbors in the small community garden outside their building. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Naomi wore her brave blue dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon Layla had found at the dollar store. They lit candles on a small cake Elena had baked. "Our brave girl," written in wobbly icing across the top, and Naomi blew out the candles with a grin, her eyes shining. "You know, Elena said later as they watched Naomi teach the other children a skipping game. You should talk to that advocacy center downtown. Your story could help other families. Layla had thought about it in the quiet moments after Naomi had gone to bed, as she washed dishes in the small sink, looking out the window at the city lights blinking against the dark sky. Their fight had opened her eyes to how many families struggled in the silence, how many parents were told their love wasn't enough because their bank accounts were small, how many children's voices were drowned out by the loud certainty of adults with power. She started volunteering at the Family Justice Center on her days off, answering phones, helping parents fill out forms they didn't understand, offering a calm, steady voice to people who came in shaking, terrified they were about to lose everything. Naomi sometimes came with her, sitting quietly in the corner with her coloring books, occasionally looking up to offer a shy smile to other children who sat, scared and small, beside their parents. One afternoon, while Layla was folding brochures at the front desk, her phone rang. It was Aisha, her voice warm but excited. "You won't believe this, Layla," she said. "Judge Rivera has instituted a new protocol for family court cases involving young children. He's calling it the Phoenix Protocol." Layla felt tears prick her eyes as she glanced over at Naomi, who was arranging her crayons in a neat rainbow line, her face calm and focused. "Phoenix?" she repeated softly. "Yes," Aisha confirmed, her voice bright. "It's designed to ensure children have a safe way to document their experiences in contested custody cases, to make sure their voices can be heard, even when it's hard." Layla thanked her, ending the call, moving across the room to kneel beside Naomi. She told her what Aisha had said, how her bravery was helping other children now, children like her who just wanted someone to listen. Naomi's eyes widened, a small, shy smile curving her lips. "Does that make us famous?" she asked softly. Layla laughed, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Not famous, baby," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Naomi's forehead. "But it means we were heard, and sometimes that's even more important." They settled into their new life, the fear that had once colored every moment replaced with a steady, quiet hope. Naomi began participating in class discussions again, her teacher telling Layla about the bright colors returning to her artwork. The way Naomi's laughter had started to echo in the classroom. Layla continued her studies, slowly saving for the day when she could leave her night shifts behind, building a life for them both where they could thrive, not just survive. One evening, as they made pancakes for dinner just because they could, Naomi looked up from the batter she was stirring, her brow furrowed in that thoughtful way Layla loved so much. "Mama," she said, "remember when the judge asked why I would want to stay with you instead of Daddy?" Layla paused, flipping a pancake carefully, glancing over with a soft smile. "I remember, baby." Naomi nodded, her missing front teeth making her smile even more precious. "I know I showed the videos instead of answering, but I know the real answer now." Layla put down the spatula, kneeling so she could look her daughter in the eyes. "What's that, sweetheart?" Naomi's smile widened, her eyes bright. "Because you listened when I was quiet, and you believed me when I finally spoke." Layla pulled her daughter into a hug, the scent of warm pancakes and vanilla filling the air, tears slipping down her cheeks as she held Naomi close, the warmth of her small body grounding her in that moment. The fear, the uncertainty, the pain they had both endured faded into the background, replaced by the quiet, powerful truth they had discovered together. Truth has its own voice, sometimes small, sometimes hidden, but always waiting to be heard. And when it finally breaks through, no amount of money, power or manipulation can silence it again. That night, as Layla walked past Naomi's bedroom on her way to clean up the kitchen, she paused, listening to the soft murmur of her daughter's voice as she tucked Mr. Bunny under the covers. "And that's how we won, Mr. Bunny," Naomi whispered, her voice calm and sure, "because the truth is the strongest superpower of all." Layla stood in the doorway for a long moment, her heart full, a quiet smile curving her lips. She couldn't have said it better herself. They were home. They were safe. They were heard. And no one could take that away. If this story touched you today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories we share here. We post true stories that deserve to be heard. If you want to watch more, check out the other videos on our channel. You'll find stories that will stay with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for watching.